Next up, we will hear from Katharina Lege. Katharina is currently doing her master's in clinical psychology, and she's doing that at the University of Magdeburg. In Magdeburg, she's also coordinating the local uniMIND group. And in her presentation, she will tell us more about the neural correlates of LSD and how they can help us further our understanding of the psychedelic experience. So please welcome Katharina Lege.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. And actually, thank you for having me for the second time at an uniMIND Symposium. And as we are running short in time, I will just dig right into my presentation on understanding the role of LSD for psychotherapeutic interventions by studying functional connectivity changes. So I will start with giving you an introduction to my fMRI data as well as to the regions of interest I've chosen based on the question, how does the coherent subjective experience emerges? Then the research questions I've chosen for today as the results and interpretations, and I will finish with a conclusion as the significance of my work and outlook for future studies. So the fMRI data are from a study of Carhart Harris and colleagues published in the year 2016, where 15 healthy drug-naive volunteers were suitable for the analysis. It's a placebo-controlled study where they used 75 micrograms of LSD in a within subjects design. So it's in resting state and therefore task-free conditions. And subjective ratings were present for between condition differences, for the 11-dimensioned altered states of consciousness questionnaire, as well as for additional visual analog style ratings. So there's a common understanding of consciousness that the coherent subjective experience emerges through feature binding in cortical midline structures. So this is what I've tried to depict here in the self model. So the brain can be understood that is functioning as a representational model of the self or ego, and it's binding self-referential stimuli via integrating information within different large-scale resting state networks that you see here with the different colors. And this coupling between the networks is supported by pyramidal neurons. So there's not one single neural substrate of consciousness, which is in line with the various different neural correlates that we can find of ego dissolution. So based on these theories, I focused on the hubs of these resting state networks. So with this greenish-blue color, you see the default mode network, and I chose the ventromedial prefrontal cortex as well as the posterior cingulate cortex, as those are supposed to be involved in higher level narrative self-representation. And with the red color, you see the salience network, where I chose the anterior insular and the anterior mid-cingulate cortex as regions of interest for embodied self-awareness. And there was also the frontoparietal network shown here in the green color, where I've used the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the posterior parietal cortex, as they are important for conscious information access. So all these networks have connections to the integration hubs, the thalamus, shown here in orange, as well as to the claustrum. This is the thin purple region you see. So these are important. We are binding multisensory information and therefore are also rich in 5-HT2A receptors. So they might be interesting targets of psychedelics. And also the dorsal raphe nucleus was chosen as a seed, as it's supposed to maintain the normal serotonergic tone within the brain. So when we think about how therapeutic potential of psychedelic drugs is mediated, we could say that the altered subjective experience is somehow important. However, we are at crossroads where it's not fully understood how these phenomena emerge from neurophysiological interactions, and it might be useful to attempt synergies using transdisciplinary research. So we should use evidence of neuroimaging studies to inform strategies for the psychedelic therapy. Therefore, my first question was, can the altered functional connectivity of the thalamus and the claustrum predict the subjective experience? Here I used a seed-based method. And with my second question, I'm asking, can the alteration in region-to-region functional connectivity measured with coherence predict the subjective experience? So let's dig right into the results for the first question. So here with these activation maps, you can see which connectivity changes of the seeds, the thalamus and the claustrum, due to LSD are related to the experience of ego dissolution. And it seems somehow that we can observe increases in connectivity with regions processing sensory information like the pre- and post-central gyri. So this could indicate somehow a shift towards sensory awareness, maybe from emerging interoceptive sensory information in the psychedelic state. So this could lead to the experience of ego dissolution, so that self-referential processes decrease. But there were also observed connectivity with the higher level association cortices shown here in the red brackets, like the frontal cortex or the anterior cingulum. So when I correlated the first level imaging outcomes with subjective ratings, I observed moderate correlations for the thalamus and the claustrum. However, when I applied Bonferroni correction of the p-values to account for the multiple testing, only the correlation between the claustrum connectivity and positive mood remains significant, showing us that there is decreased connectivity of the claustrum associated with the stronger experience. There was also a tendency observed for ego dissolution. So we can say the claustrum is somehow involved in the mechanism of action of LSD on altering the subjective experience. So it could be that the altered functional coupling compromises the information integration within the claustrum, and this might lead somehow to the alteration in the coherency of the conscious experience. So, as I already said, for my second question, I used the measure of coherence. Why that? Because there is an issue of time series connectivity measured with correlation. So what you can see here in this plot is that we have different hemodynamic lags in signal activation. So this could lead to anti-correlations if one region peaks earlier than another. And if we look at the different reports of increased and also decreased functional connectivity in the present psychedelic research, it could somehow be useful to account for the functional coupling using coherency of time series, because it's a time invariant measure of the functional coupling in the frequency domain rather than in the time domain. And this is also shown here in this regression plot. So you can see that coherence between the thalamus and the anterior insula, this is the orange line, could explain more additional variance of ego dissolution ratings. So if you look at the blue line, this was with correlation. There, the model fit was not that good. So somehow in this sample, the coherency was better to explain variance on ego dissolution ratings. Here you see an adjacency matrix showing you the between condition differences in functional coupling, where the darker orange indicates a more coherent brain state due to LSD. So it seems that somehow that increased connectivity between normally distinct brain regions was observed, but especially between the thalamus and the claustrum, as between the thalamus and the posterior cingulate cortex. There was also increased coupling with the thalamus and the hubs of the salience network, but especially between those hubs and the salience network. So this again indicates somehow altered salience processing. So here you see the strongest correlation for coherence values with subjective ratings. Again, I used a two-sided test for significance and accounted for p-value correction using Bonferroni method. And you see that there was increased coupling between the anterior insula and thalamus measured with coherence, associated with the overall intensity of the experience, as also with emotional arousal and ego dissolution. So actually the correlation with ego dissolution was highly significant, show you here in the red bracket. So both of the hubs, the anterior insula and the thalamus, are implicated in self-awareness and salience processing. So again, this points into the direction of alteration of the guiding and processing of salient information. And this might alter somehow the coherent experience of the self. So it could be that resources are allocated in different ways, so that we have decreased self-referential processes. And this is actually in line with studies that have shown before that there are global increases in undirected functional connectivity in the thalamus as well as in the insula that were correlating with ego dissolution. But there was also another association between the coherence of the thalamus with the ventromedial prefrontal cortex with the experience of positive mood. So there is an association with the altered emotional processing. And this is in line with the proposed role of the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, as it's supposed to be involved in the binding of affect to memories. And positive mood is actually a part of the peak experience and also of the pleasurable experience self-dissolution. So we could say that this coherency between the thalamus and the ventral medial prefrontal cortex is involved in facilitating changes in habitual patterns like the experience of emotion. So, to conclude this, I observed altered resting state functional connectivity of the thalamus and the claustrum with sensory cortices that are associated with ratings on ego dissolution. So this was in line with proposed mechanisms of psychedelics to alter the processing of sensory information. There was also functional coupling measured with coherence, which could predict certain subjective effects of LSD. So altered salience processing might be a possible important mechanism for experience of ego dissolution. So we can say in sum, my evidence points towards a modulatory effect induced by LSD on the functional connectivity of regions involved in a coherent conscious experience of the self. So when we consider the crossroads faced in a psychedelic field with inconsistency in neurocorrelates, my analysis offers 3 different aspects that we could consider in future research. So first, I tried to integrate theories of altered consciousness through psychedelics within the framework of established resting state networks. So instead of focusing solely on the default mode network, it might be useful to extend this network view and include the salience network as the frontoparietal network as well. And my results could show that changes of the salience network could explain additional variants of subjective phenomena. And secondly, it might be useful to account for the role of the claustrum in altered states of consciousness. So I could show that there is a modulatory effect through LSD on a claustrum, which could be captured by functional connectivity, actually similar to that of the thalamus. And it was also able to explain variants of the subjective experiences. And third, I want to emphasize the use of coherence as a possible measure of functional connectivity instead of the conventional Pearson's correlation. So it can explain action of LSD as it's accounting for phase-shifted effects in signal propagation. And it can also show us which regions correspond with each other based on their signal content. So we can use this as a basis for further analysis. So again, coherence might be useful to implement an fMRI analysis. And as I think we are all already packed for the day, I would just like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer some questions.
Thank you very much, Katharina. So we will take one question from myself. So for your analysis, you used fMRI data, raw data obtained by the Imperial College London. And I was wondering how easy or difficult is it for you to access the raw data of psychedelic studies and apply your own analysis?
Yeah, it was actually quite hard. I started working on my master thesis for over a half year. So I started last year, and I was looking for data because I couldn't do just my own research with psychedelics in Germany, so this is not really possible for a master student. And I couldn't find anything in the internet on free data. It was really hard, but then I somehow stumbled at the platform OpenNeuro on this data set, and that was able to access the pre-processed data of Carl Harris. So yeah, we should be really thankful for open research here.
Thank you very much, Katharina.